In the silence of the desert, in a place where the wind carries the whispers of forgotten centuries, where the sand holds the memory of ancient footsteps, there exists a teaching so profound, so revolutionary, so dangerous, that it was deliberately hidden even from most of Christ's own disciples. This teaching was not about salvation through faith alone, not about obedience to institutional authority, not about the denial of the body or the rejection of the material world. This teaching was about the awakening of consciousness itself, about the recognition of the divine spark within every human being, about the transformation of the human into the divine through a process of initiation and inner work. This is the teaching of the golden dragon of the Essenes, the teaching that Jesus kept hidden, the teaching that would have transformed Christianity into something entirely different had it been allowed to flourish. The Essenes were not an ordinary religious sect. They were a community of mystics and initiates who lived apart from the mainstream of Jewish society, who preserved ancient knowledge that had been passed down through countless generations, who understood the mysteries of consciousness and the structure of creation in ways that were far beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. They lived in communities scattered throughout the Judean desert, in places like Qumran, where they devoted themselves to spiritual practice, to the study of sacred texts, to the cultivation of inner awareness, to the preparation of individuals who were ready to receive the deepest teachings of the divine. And among the Essenes, there was a teaching so secret, so carefully guarded, that it was known only to the highest initiates, only to those who had proven themselves worthy through years of discipline and dedication. This teaching was symbolized by the image of the golden dragon, a creature that represented the awakening of the Kundalini energy, the rising of consciousness through the chakras, the transformation of the human being into a vessel for divine power and wisdom. Jesus, according to the hidden records that have survived in fragments and pieces, was initiated into this teaching during his years of study with the Essenes. The Gospels speak of his childhood and then jump to his baptism by John, leaving a gap of nearly 30 years about which we know almost nothing. During these hidden years, Jesus was undergoing the initiations of the Essenes, was learning the techniques of consciousness transformation, was being prepared to become a teacher of the highest mysteries. But when Jesus emerged from his training and began his public ministry, he made a crucial decision. He decided not to teach the deepest mysteries to the masses, not to reveal the teaching of the golden dragon to those who were not prepared to receive it. Instead, he taught in parables and metaphors, in stories that could be understood on multiple levels, in ways that would speak to the consciousness of each person according to their level of understanding. To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, he told his disciples, but to them it has not been given. This was not a statement of judgment or condemnation, but a recognition of the reality of consciousness. The deepest teachings could only be transmitted to those who had undergone the necessary preparation, who had developed the inner capacity to receive and integrate such knowledge without being destroyed by it. The teaching of the Golden Dragon was about the structure of human consciousness, about the energy centers that existed within the human body, about the pathways through which divine energy flowed, about the techniques through which an individual could awaken these centers and allow the divine energy to rise through the body, transforming the individual from an ordinary human being into a conscious co-creator of reality. This teaching was preserved in the Essene communities, passed down from teacher to student, encoded in symbols and sacred geometry, hidden in the very structure of their communities and their rituals. And it was this teaching that Jesus had learned, that he had integrated into his own being, that had allowed him to perform the miracles and the healings that were attributed to him in the Gospels. But the teaching was dangerous. It threatened the authority of the religious establishment, which sought to maintain control over the people through the monopoly on spiritual knowledge. It threatened the authority of the Roman Empire, which sought to maintain control through domination and the suppression of consciousness. And so, after the death of Jesus, the institutional church that emerged deliberately suppressed this teaching, declared it to be heretical, hunted down those who preserved it, and tried to erase all traces of it from human consciousness. The story of the recovery of this teaching begins with a scholar named David, a man who had spent his entire life studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ancient texts that had been discovered in caves near Qumran in the mid-20th century. David was not a believer in the conventional sense, not someone who accepted religious doctrine without question. Rather, he was a seeker of truth, someone who was willing to follow evidence wherever it led, even if it led him into territories that challenged the official narratives of Christianity. David had noticed something peculiar in the Dead Sea Scrolls, something that most scholars had overlooked or dismissed as unimportant. There were references, scattered throughout the texts, to something called the Way of the Dragon, or the Path of the Golden Fire. These references were cryptic and symbolic, written in a language that seemed designed to be understood only by those who possessed the key to decode it. He began to research these references obsessively, comparing them with other ancient texts, with the teachings of various mystical traditions, with the fragmentary accounts that had survived in the apocryphal Gospels and the Gnostic texts. And slowly, a picture began to emerge, a picture of a teaching so profound and so comprehensive that it seemed to encompass all of the spiritual wisdom that humanity had ever possessed. The teaching spoke of 7 energy centers within the human body, centers that corresponded to different levels of consciousness and different aspects of human experience. It spoke of a divine fire, a kundalini energy, that could be awakened and guided to rise through these centers, transforming the individual at each level, until finally the consciousness of the individual merged with the consciousness of the divine itself. But most importantly, the teaching spoke of a process, a methodology, a set of practices through which this transformation could be achieved. It spoke of meditation techniques, of breathing practices, of visualizations, of sacred movements, of ways of working with the body and the mind to awaken the dormant potential that existed within every human being. David realized that this teaching had been preserved in fragmented form in various spiritual traditions around the world. He found it in the yoga practices of India, in the Taoist teachings of China, in the Sufi practices of Islam, in the mystical traditions of Judaism and Christianity. The teaching was universal, had been discovered independently by various cultures, but had been most systematically developed and preserved by the Essenes, and he realized something else. He realized that Jesus had not only learned this teaching, but had embodied it, had become a living demonstration of what was possible when a human being fully awakened to their divine nature and allowed the divine energy to flow through them completely. The miracles that were attributed to Jesus were not violations of natural law, but demonstrations of what became possible when consciousness was fully awakened and aligned with the divine will. David made the decision to dedicate the remainder of his life to recovering and reconstructing this teaching, to making it available to those who were ready to receive it. He began to write, to teach, to work with other scholars and spiritual teachers who had discovered fragments of this knowledge. He created a synthesis of the various traditions, showing how they all pointed toward the same underlying truth, the same path of consciousness transformation. But as David's work became more widely known, he began to encounter resistance. There were those within the institutional church who saw his work as a threat, who feared that the revelation of this teaching would undermine their authority and their control. There were academic institutions that tried to suppress his work, to prevent his books from being published, to discredit his research. And there were more subtle forms of resistance as well. David began to experience strange phenomena, synchronicities that seemed designed to distract him from his work, health problems that appeared and disappeared mysteriously, encounters with people who seemed to know far more about his research than they should have known. It became clear to him that there were forces, both institutional and perhaps even non-human, that were working to prevent the revelation of this teaching. If you want a practical, step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. But David was not deterred. He understood that the suppression of this teaching had been one of the greatest tragedies of human history, that the recovery and dissemination of this knowledge was essential for the spiritual evolution of humanity. And so he continued his work, continued to research, continued to write, continued to teach. He discovered that there were still communities, hidden communities, that had preserved the teaching of the Golden Dragon in its most complete form. These communities existed in various parts of the world, in remote monasteries and hidden temples, in the hearts of cities disguised as ordinary spiritual centers. And he began to make contact with these communities, to learn from the teachers who had preserved the knowledge, to integrate their teachings into his own understanding. One of these teachers was a woman named Sophia, an elderly woman who lived in a small monastery in the mountains of Greece. Sophia was said to be a direct descendant of the Essene lineage, a woman who had been trained in the deepest mysteries of the Golden Dragon teaching since childhood. When David finally met her, after years of searching, he felt as though he had come home, as though he had finally found the source of the knowledge he had been seeking. The teaching has been preserved, Sophia told him, not because it was hidden away in books or in secret chambers, but because it was encoded into the very structure of human consciousness. Every human being carries within them the potential for this awakening. Every human being has the capacity to become a conscious co-creator of reality. But most people have been conditioned to suppress this potential, to deny it, to fear it. The teaching of the Golden Dragon is simply the process of awakening to what has always been present, of removing the obstacles that prevent the natural flow of divine consciousness through the human form. She taught David the practices that had been preserved, showed him how to work with the energy centers of the body, how to awaken the Kundalini fire, how to guide it through the chakras, how to integrate the awakening at each level. And as David practiced these techniques, he began to experience the truth of the teaching directly, began to feel the transformation occurring within his own being. He understood that the teaching was not about belief, not about faith in external authority, but about direct experience, about the cultivation of consciousness through systematic practice. He understood that this was the teaching that Jesus had learned, that had enabled him to perform miracles, that had allowed him to demonstrate the possibilities of fully awakened human consciousness. And he understood something else. He understood that this teaching was not meant to be kept secret forever, that there was a time appointed for its revelation, that the time had come in the modern world for this knowledge to be brought forth and made available to those who were ready to receive it. David spent the final years of his life working to synthesize all of the knowledge he had gathered, to create a comprehensive teaching that would make the path of the Golden Dragon accessible to modern practitioners. He wrote books that were published under various names. He created videos and online courses. He trained other teachers who could carry forward the work. And he established networks of practitioners who were working together to awaken to their divine nature and to assist others in doing the same. When David died, his work lived on. The teaching of the Golden Dragon began to spread, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. More and more people began to discover the practices, to experience the awakening that they produced, to recognize the truth of what Jesus had taught and embodied. And in our own time, we are witnessing a great awakening of this knowledge. Millions of people around the world are discovering meditation practices, yoga, breathwork, and other techniques that are designed to awaken the Kundalini energy and transform consciousness. They are experiencing the truth of the teaching directly, are recognizing that the divine is not distant and external, but intimate and present within their own being. The teaching of the Golden Dragon is rising again. The knowledge that was hidden is being revealed, and those who are ready to receive this teaching, who are willing to undertake the discipline and the practice that it requires, are being called to step into their own divine potential, to become conscious co-creators of reality, to join in the great work of transformation that is unfolding in our time. Jesus taught this way to his closest disciples. He showed them that it was possible for a human being to fully awaken to their divine nature, to allow the divine consciousness to flow through them completely, to become a channel for divine power and wisdom. And he told them that they would do even greater works than he had done, that all who believed in him would be able to perform miracles, to heal, to transform consciousness, to participate in the creation of a new world. This is the teaching that was hidden. This is the knowledge that the institutional church tried to suppress. This is the path that Jesus walked and that he invited all of his followers to walk. The Golden Dragon of the Essenes is awakening in the consciousness of humanity. The teaching is being revealed. And the question that is being posed to each of us is this: will we answer the call? Will we undertake the discipline and the practice? Will we allow ourselves to be transformed? Will we become conscious co-creators of the reality we wish to inhabit? The teaching is available. The path is clear. The time is now, and you are invited to join in the great awakening that is transforming humanity and the world. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.